Despite being destitute, this man managed to make it to the NBA. How can someone go from being a homeless person to signing deals for $100 million and becoming one of the NBA's top stars? Well, here is Jimmy Butler's tale.
Butler. Go get it!
Since Jimmy was just a young child growing up in one of Texas' wealthiest communities, you'd never imagine him to have been homeless. But when he was barely 13 years old, his entire world fell apart. Jimmy's father abandoned his family inexplicably and without warning. Jimmy's mother just couldn't bear to look at his face because he resembles the family's traitorous father. She eventually lost her cool with Jimmy and told him, "You need to go to the streets. I don't like the way you look."
My mom kicked me out of my house, to tell the truth, and I bounced in and out of guys' houses in high school.
Jimmy's road to NBA success was about to get more difficult than you might expect for a teenager who is forced to navigate life on his own. See, if he couldn't crash at his friend's place on any given day, he would just wander the streets. Being homeless in the Texas heat would be brutal for anyone, but Jimmy in particular, and living like that compelled them to make a decision that would change their lives.
So I was always a big football fan. You know, being from Texas, football is big. I think basketball made me third. But then I wasn't a fan of the sun, wasn't a fan of the heat. Plus, I was tiny. I was like 5'3". Everybody else started growing. I was like, I don't want to get crushed. I'm gonna move inside to the AC, shoot at the orange rim.
Jimmy quickly enrolled in basketball at Tomball High School, where he determined to become a star player, even though he wasn't aware of how vital switching sports would become at the time. Jimmy started playing basketball in his senior year, which led to him meeting Jordan Leslie, his new best friend. Little did they know, though, that they would soon become a family.
I mean, I was always like, man, you can stay tonight. My mom won't care. And then I'd just be like, oh, just one more night. And it just kind of developed into a week and then a month.
More vital than finding a permanent home, Jimmy experienced love and support. Jimmy couldn't disappoint this family since he realized they were taking a chance by allowing a stranger into their home. Jimmy had optimism for the first time in his life. Even though his basketball career was just getting started, he immediately established a goal that most young children could only imagine: making the NBA. However, Jimmy remained persistent, and the adventure got off to a good start that year when he committed to playing basketball at Tyler Junior College.
I remember the first time walking down this bad baby. I knew I ended the game with 33 points. And with that 33 points, I was asking myself, is this real? Can I really score 33 points on a nightly basis? And then the next time I came out, 35 points. So I knew that I belonged here. This is where it started for me.
Dropping 30 points at night seems wonderful to me. I don't know about you, but as you can see, Jimmy was only dominating players in junior college, where accomplishments were essentially meaningless. Jimmy understood he had to boost his game if he wanted to realize his aspirations. And when he was accepted into a highly regarded university, Jimmy realized that his objectives were even more challenging than he had anticipated because he already had a star teammate who was drawing attention to himself. As a result, Jimmy started to question whether he had actually turned pro because he knew how to compete for attention with his own colleagues.
And I was like, man, can I really compete with the best of these guys? You know, if you pass the ball, you might not get the ball. Like everybody trying to get to the next level.
Jimmy understood that he already couldn't afford to make any mistakes given the level of competition and the team, particularly considering that Jimmy's star teammate, who had already committed to Marquette University, consistently showed up and attracted the attention of coaches. Buzz Williams, a new Marquette assistant coach. Jimmy was determined to convince him that they made the wrong choice.
Buzz came in, he was an assistant at Marquette under Crean at the time, and he comes up to me and was like, you know what, if I ever had a head coaching job, like, you would be a player that I would want to you to come play for me.
Buzz Williams wanted Jimmy to visit Marquette, but everything you said happened, and then one day out of nowhere, Jimmy's phone started ringing.
I'm the first person he calls, like, and he always had told me the truth and all of this, so, you know, without even visiting, I went to Marquette.
Jimmy had officially achieved his first objective and was on his way to Marquette University, but this was only a modest step in the right direction. Jimmy understood that the stakes were higher, the competition was strong, and he couldn't remain average if he wanted to advance. Jimmy faced the hardest challenges of his life as a result of his desire to play in the NBA, shared by all of his new teammates, and the fact that the player starting in front of him was already a star player on the NBA squad. Because Marquette's starting guard at the time was Wesley Matthews, an NBA prospect, and because Jimmy believed there was no way he could be better than Wesley, Jimmy panicked and felt as though his NBA dream was slipping away. However, he should have known better because he had been recruited to Marquette for a reason. Coach Buzz made Jimmy work harder than all of his teammates because he recognized his potential. Jimmy occasionally had to report to extra drills at 5:30 in the morning. Although the practices Jimmy endured were cruel, they were all a secret component of Coach Buzz's grand scheme to get Jimmy into the league. He was aware of Jimmy's background and his ambition to play in the NBA. Buzz wanted to be the one who brought him there. Ironically, though, the extra work was what ultimately led Jimmy to give up basketball.
I want to come home. I want to transfer, because he was so hard on me. I was so far away from home, homesick. I'm still a kid.
I wanted to go home because I was extremely difficult in coaching him because I thought that he could evolve into being a guy towards the end of the year that could help us.
Wesley was out there dominating, having the best season of his college career, and Jimmy didn't know it yet, but being pushed that hard was about to be his biggest blessing behind the scenes. He eagerly awaited an opportunity. Therefore, every day Jimmy was encouraged to improve his game until later that year, when Wesley made his way into the NBA, leaving Marquette with an open starting position because Wesley was on the rise. Everyone at Marquette knew Jimmy was working hard to take over as the next leader, and now they are giving him the chance to prove himself. However, despite the fact that his efforts have finally paid off, Jimmy isn't entirely sure he can replace Wesley Matthews. Jimmy only had a year to improve his draft stock because at the time, not a single NBA team had even acknowledged him. If he failed, his dreams would end exactly on time. Wesley returned at that point and provided Jimmy some guidance that would change his life.
I never forget, Wesley Matthews came back. I was like, yo, you can play in the league. I was like, word. And that's when I really started to take basketball for real, for real. Maybe I can be a pro at the highest level. Not Europe pro, nothing's wrong with that. But the NBA, that's where you want to be at. That's the best of the best.
I knew it was now or never the moment Jimmy became sure he could make the NBA. He entered that season with a chip on his shoulder, making game-winning baskets and averaging over 15 points per game. Jimmy even led Marquette to back-to-back victories during March Madness, but despite all of his success, his ultimate goal was to become a professional athlete. Jimmy took a leap of faith and declared for the NBA draft following his 2011 campaign. But that's when things started to become tense, since everyone was about to find out whether Jimmy's basketball career was ended or just getting started.
Every journey begins with a desire. Each seeker, embracing the unknown, labors to discover what he can endure. At the end of that road, what will he become?
All of the nation's top high school and college athletes congregated here, hoping that their dreams would soon come true. Jimmy was aware of his rivals. However, he continued to have faith that soon his name would be called and he would be chosen once the picks arrived.
With the first pick in the 2011 NBA draft, the Cleveland Cavaliers select Kyrie Irving.
With the 15th pick in the 2011 NBA draft, the Indiana Pacers select Kawhi Leonard. With the 11th pick in the 2011 NBA draft, the Golden State Warriors select Klay Thompson from Washington State University.
Jimmy's name was never called as teams made their selections. Since he wasn't a freak athlete and didn't run quickly or put on wild highlights, most clubs considered him as a huge problem and decided against drafting him because of his potential, since they felt it was too dangerous.
30th pick in the 2011 draft, the Chicago Bulls select Jimmy Butler from Marquette University.
Instantly burst out into tears with my mom, because I just felt like all the hard work that I've done, and all the people that tell me that I wouldn't amount to anything, that I couldn't be an NBA player, that I wouldn't get my degree, I wouldn't go to college, I wouldn't do this, I wouldn't do that. But more than anything, it was I proved myself right. I could care less about proving them wrong. I wanted to prove to myself that if I said I could do it, I put my mind to it, and I did it.
Nobody was willing to put so much weight on it until recently. Now that Jimmy had achieved his dream of playing in the NBA, he understood that doing so was only the first step toward a much greater objective. Jimmy resolved to give basketball his all and spread the message that anything is possible to the entire globe after realizing how fortunate he was to go from being homeless to being a professional player and being in a position to achieve greatness and inspire millions of people.